Hello, and welcome to Horrific Tales. In this show we celebrate the creation of independent authors and aspiring writers. Please like and subscribe and share these episodes so we can help our talented friends get as much exposure as possible. We'd also appreciate it if you could support our artists by following them on their individual platforms and by purchasing their works. Details on how to do this are in the episode description. In this horrific tale, we find that an old wound is far from healed in this preview of the upcoming novel by Stephen Knight. Join us now as we present The Rules of the Game. Glenn Tonkus was 73 years old. For over 40 years he had been getting away with what he thought was the norm, expressing his same-sex activity and paedophilic tendencies by snaring and grooming vulnerable young boys. Some went to school where he worked, another through his charity work at the Catholic Church he attended. He thought he was invincible. He had succeeded. He had won the game for all those years, and no one could touch him now. How wrong he was. There was a forceful thumping on his door of a city centre apartment. He struggled to the door as his age began to show, along with the several strokes that he had suffered in the past years. As he opened the door, he saw a man and a woman stood outside, waving police warrant cards. DC Nell stepped inside without invitation, closely followed by his colleague, DC Dominique. "Glenn Tonkus?" "Yes, that's me. What's this all about?" "Glenn Tonkus, I am arresting you on suspicion of sexual offences against a minor. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something that you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence." DC Nell pulled out his handcuffs. Even though this was an old man, he wasn't going to give him any preferential treatment, especially with the nature of the crime and given the statements that had been given by 6 different victims who lived in various parts of the country, and since school had never had contact. "Sexual offences?" Tonkus asked in reply. "What do you mean, sexual offences?" "Hands behind your back, please, Mr. Tonkus," DC Nell exclaimed, noticing at first that the old man looked confused and didn't do as he was asked. "Hands behind your back, please." "That is tight," Tonkus yelled as the reality of the handcuffs on his wrist became apparent to him. "Never mind," DC Nell said, not appearing to take any notice of the prisoner. "Here, Andrea, take him to the car for me." DC Dominic grabbed Tonkus by the shoulder with one hand and placed her other hand on the centre of the handcuffs, and then directed him to the nearby car. "Come on," she said to Tonkus. "Outside." As she walked outside, a handful of uniformed officers entered the apartment and stood close to DC Nell. "Okay, search and bag anything that might give us something," DC Nell stated as he watched the 4 all disappear into separate rooms, while each carrying a range of different size evidence bags. Life had started to catch up with him. John Smith didn't like the news. It was depressing. He rarely had the television on because of just that. In John's mind, all the news ever talked about was death, murder, rape, car crashes, invasions, and third world countries struggling to survive under war-torn tyranny or famine. Even the soaps were not true to life and full of violence. The rest of the television was all about reality, which was like an arranged marriage, scripted. But something today in his mixed-up mind told him to turn on the television. BBC Spotlight headlines. His eyes widened and the look of horror filled his face. He watched the reporter stood outside the Plymouth Magistrates Court, television camera pointed at the entrance. A group of people had gathered outside of the pub in the corner, pints in hand, wondering what all the commotion was about. The old man came out through the door, closely followed by a solicitor, and there was a sudden surge towards him from both television and newspaper reporters. An ex-school teacher appeared in front of magistrates today, charged with a number of sexual offences against children over 30 years ago. Glenn Tonkus, who taught art at the city centre, simply responded to his name as the magistrate informed him that because of the serious nature of the crime, it would be transferred to the Crown Court immediately. Because of his age and health concerns, he was not seen as a flight risk and was bailed to appear in Plymouth Crown Court at a date to be set by the CPS. He must also report to Charles Cross Police Station 3 times a week in line with his bail conditions. We're going to see if we can get a comment from the accused teacher. With that, she joined the multitude of reporters and edged forward. All of them shouted questions and gathered around the waiting taxi, which at first both he and the solicitor had difficulty getting into as the doors were blocked by legs from reporters. Cameras flashed brightly in their faces as the solicitor managed to open the door, and pushed down on the head of the accused, who finally got into the back seat of the car. "Ladies and gentlemen," the solicitor exclaimed, "my client has expressed his complete innocence on any matters that the police and CPS have charged him with. Please remember he is innocent until proven guilty, and that any reporting in this case can and most probably will jeopardise the jury's verdict. May I please leave?" With that, he got into the taxi and closed the door, exclaiming to the driver, "Go, please." The taxi driver found it hard, as some of the reporters stood in front of the car, and their camera flashes were still on full throttle, as they tried to get a picture of the accused paedophile. The driver edged forward slowly, and finally escaping the paparazzi and heading up towards a roundabout. "Take a detour," the solicitor continued, "just in case we're being followed. We don't want them knowing his address. Well, not immediately in any case." "Okay, sir." The taxi driver knew not to ask any questions in his normal chatty manner, but guessed that one of the passengers had been in court for something serious, due to the amount of press. No doubt he would find out later when he bought a newspaper to read whilst waiting for his next fare. Instead of heading to the Frankfurt Gate area, he drove up the North Hill and into Mutley Plain. He looked at the smartly dressed solicitor in his rearview mirror and watched him repeatedly, looking back to check if they were being followed. The taxi driver turned in beside the Hyde Park Social Club and immediately parked up. "I'll stop here a minute," he said. "See if anyone follows us in." "Good idea." He waited for a few minutes. There was no other cars or pedestrians following. "Right," the taxi driver exclaimed. "I think that's it. We're clear." He started to move once more and headed down to Ford Park Cemetery and over towards Pennington Quick. Glenn Tonkus showed worry on his face, but in all his arrogance he wanted to know why the taxi driver had just followed instructions and hadn't asked what all the commotion was about. "You seem very quiet," the paedophile stated emotionally. "You haven't asked what this is all about." "Glenn, stop now," snapped the solicitor. "In this job you get all sorts. You also get to know when not to ask questions. What happens in the cab stays in the cab with me. I saw what was back there, and quite frankly, I don't want to know. I'm just a driver." "Thank you," the solicitor replied to the sensible taxi driver. "No problem," he said as he drove down Western Approach and back towards the Harwell Street where Tonkus lived. Somehow he guessed what the man had been charged with, but would wait until he read it in the paper rather than assume. John stood in front of his television, completely mesmerised by what he was seeing outside the magistrate's court. His anger rising, and his quest for revenge on the paedophile who had taken away his innocence all those years ago rising to the highest level it had done since it had happened. John was a victim. If the police knew that, there would be 7, but he knew there would be a lot more. The police probably knew there were a lot more, but in over 30 years people had moved on and could not be traced. John asked himself if he should go to the police, but he had other ideas. Right now he had to do something about the anger. He headed downstairs to the basement and unlocked the door in the padlock. Then he headed into the left room and reached up to one of the cages containing one of the rabbits. He took it out and cuddled it into his chest. Wavered for a while whilst looking around the room and trying to decide if he really wanted to conduct the task. The needs of the one outweighed the needs of the many, he told himself, before stepping over towards the room on the right hand side, the anger growing inside him, and he started to scream lightly both inside and vocally. He had done this so many times before, but never so prominently. He walked into his room. It was his room. He felt at home there. He was in charge. No one could force him to do anything. He was the man. He was the judge and jury. He placed the rabbit on the dock, which was a metal plate surrounded by clear perspex on all 4 sides. Then he closed the top of the dock, which is also made of metal, the top and bottom joined by metal plates 2 inches wide. Attached to the plates, 2 clamps similarly used when jump starting a car. He ensured the top was secure and the power clamps were attached. Then he walked over to the judge's bench, as he liked to call it. He stared at the rabbit who innocently roamed around the new surroundings of the box. "Glenn Tonkus, you have been found guilty of rape of a minor. There is only one punishment suitable for this crime, the punishment of death. Electricity will be passed through your body until life is extinct." With that, he looked directly at the defendant and clicked the switch on his bench. The rabbit started to jump with the shock, his feet hitting the bottom electrified plate, and as he jumped, his head hitting the top. Within seconds, the animal started squealing with immense pain. Suddenly, the near-dead rabbit's body exploded, and blood filled the clear perspex sides. The smell of something burning filled the room as the organs of the creature continued to fry in the electrified device. John knew it was dead, but he had to make sure that Glenn Tonkus was dead, and so he didn't turn the device off for several minutes. He started to laugh psychotically. "Dead!" he shouted. "Dead!" he repeated. Then he turned the switch to off. The noise lowered in the volume, but something was still sizzling as it cooked. John's anger had increased. He wasn't happy. Furiously he stepped down and swiftly went back into the left room, reached up and undid another cage, grabbed the rabbit, but this time not caring if he hurt the poor creature, as he grabbed it tightly with its nails digging into its sides. The rabbit wriggled and tried to escape. "Fucking stay still!" John exclaimed before using both hands on the thing. Then he quickly went back into the courtroom, placed the bunny in the makeshift box on top of the remains of the dead one. He went to his bench and repeated the feat again, smelling the burning flesh. 3 more times. 3 more rabbits before he gave up the punishment. This is the most he had ever punished, with the previous personal best being 3 on the anniversary of his rape by Glenn Tonkus. He didn't bother cleaning up the executions. He was too angry at the moment. He had to find out more about Tonkus. He went back upstairs, washed his hands in the kitchen, and then went into the living room to watch the television, flicking through the news channels to ascertain if it had reached the national news. BBC News Channel, nothing. Sky News Channel, nothing. That was it. He had to get a newspaper. He grabbed his coat that was slung over the back of the sofa and exited his apartment. Whilst not putting his coat on until he was walking quickly down towards the one-stop shop at the precinct, just 5 minutes walk away from his house. He headed over to the newspaper stand, grabbed the local Herald newspaper and started reading whilst walking to the cash desk. He smacked a pound coin on the desk and walked away, whilst continuing to read the front page. "Excuse me, sir, I need to scan it," the assistant shouted at the man exited the store. "Shit, your change." Nothing. No reply. Not even the usual 4-letter outburst that the staff usually receive from people in the area who use the shop. He placed the change in the charity box on the counter. The angry man continued reading the newspaper as he crossed the road. Cars coming from both directions screeched to a halt and sounded their horns as he took no notice of the green lights at the pedestrian crossing. He went home and was just about to go into the front door when he was approached by a man from the house next door. "Excuse me," he said, raising his hand to get John's attention. "Can I have a word?" John took his attention away from the newspaper and looked at his neighbour but didn't speak. He simply made a gesture with his head to let him know he was listening. "Remember I spoke to you some time ago about that foul stench that seems to be coming from your basement into mine?" John nodded, again not saying anything, as though he saw the man as a threat. The man stared down the moat towards John's basement. "Are you cooking something? It's stinking again today." He had to get rid of him. He had more important things to deal with right now. "I'll deal with it," he exclaimed, before continuing his journey towards his own front door. "Well, make sure you do this time, otherwise I'm going to have to call environmental health." John really wanted to tell the man to fuck off, but he couldn't be bothered with nosy neighbours. This guy was always complaining about something in any case. If not to him, to the others around him. In the end, John would turn on the extractor fan as he always normally did after an execution. He was in too much of a rush this time due to his anger. He opened the door and disappeared inside and went through to the kitchen. He placed the newspaper on the worktop and then began reading the report in more detail. It had received front page, plus a continued on page 2 section, which indicated that the local newspaper had thought it was a big story for the area. Plymouth had an increase in crime in the last few years. Even though the police declared a lowering figure in reported crime, the local support groups had challenged their figures. Because the police now prioritised crimes, and to some, such as burglaries where the culprit was no longer in the premises, they just gave a crime number. Yes, the police were overstretched, but with the concept of not attending every crime immediately, the general public had chosen not to bother to report crime, which made the figures incorrect, although in some way it allowed the police to meet their targets. The case surrounding the actions of Glenn Tonkus was going to be controversial by any means. John could see that, with the importance of the story. Very few times did the Herald report in such a way that held interest to the city. But this was good reporting, and the photographer had even managed to get a good photo of the man trying to hide his guilty face. John stared at the photo. The man was old. He had lost his scruffy hair from the late 70s, and his head was now balding. He walked with a stick, and instantly John began to wonder if this was just a way of making him look vulnerable to the members of the judicial system. Glenn Tonkus was that sort of man. Twisted. John felt something inside. He was 54. Should he let justice take its course, with the hope that it would prevail? He had waited 40 years. It had ruined him. Your parents always warn you about the dirty old men, but you never think that you will be the victim of one of them. Justice may not prevail. The pervert may get himself a top lawyer. With all the charges relating to offences such a long time ago, they may be hard to prove. He might get away with it. No, John needed a plan. He had time. The case wouldn't be in court for several months, although the plea hearing would be held at the Crown Court soon. One thing he told himself, he didn't need rabbits anymore. But one thing the papers did tell him, Tonkus lived in Harwell Street. That was a start for his plan. Time to play the game. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes, then subscribe to our YouTube channel and like or follow our social media pages. You can also give the channel support by visiting our merchandise store and picking up some of our items. Please also take a moment to support our contributing artists who very kindly lend their talents to the show. Check out the links in the description on how you can do this. Well, that just leaves me to say, until next time my friends, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.